December 16, 1985, 5:26 p.m., Midtown Manhattan outside Spark Steakhouse. The air in New York City feels like wet iron. It's freezing, the kind of cold that seeps through a wool overcoat and settles in your marrow. The Christmas lights on 46th Street are blurred by a light, greasy drizzle. A black limousine pulls up to the curb. Inside, Paul Castellano, the Pope of the Gambino family, prepares to step out for dinner. He is old, detached, and comfortable. He thinks he's untouchable because of the title he holds. Click, that's the sound of a slide racking. Across the street, 4 men in light-colored trench coats and Russian fur hats wait. They aren't just shadows, they are the physical manifestation of a changing tide. As Castellano steps onto the pavement, the world explodes. The rhythmic pop, pop, pop of semi-automatics echoes off the glass skyscrapers. Smoke mixes with the winter mist. Castellano hits the concrete, his blood dark and steaming against the slush. But 3 blocks away in a darkened sedan, a man with silver-streaked hair and a $2,000 suit watches the chaos through a window. John Gotti doesn't smile. He just watches. He isn't just killing a boss. He's murdering an old way of doing business. "Drive," Gotti says. His voice is a gravelly sandpaper rasp. To understand how we reach this sidewalk covered in spent brass and broken glass, we have to understand the rule of the street. You don't kill a king unless you're ready to become the devil. Gotti wasn't just ready. He had been auditioning for the role his entire life. But the hit on Castellano wasn't the end. It was the opening bell for a war that would redefine the word loyalty. Castellano was dead, but the commission, the board of directors for the 5 families, hadn't voted on this. In the MAFIA, an unauthorized hit is a death sentence. Gotti had just declared war on the entire underworld, and the first retaliation was already being whispered in the backrooms of Brooklyn. Gotti thought he had cleared his path to the throne, but he didn't realize that by killing the Pope, he had turned himself into the most expensive target in America. 2 weeks later, Mulberry Street, Little Italy. The Ravenite Social Club is a narrow, dimly lit storefront. It smells of stale espresso, expensive cigars, and the underlying scent of damp brick. This is Gotti's fortress. Outside, the FBI sits in parked vans, their lenses trained on the door. Inside, Gotti sits in a throne-like chair, surrounded by men who would kill their own fathers for a nod of his head. "Paul was soft," Gotti remarks, flicking an ash onto the floor. "He traded the streets for a mansion in Staten Island. You can't run a family from a palace. You run it from the pavement." Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano sits to his right. Sammy is shorter, broader, a man of few words and violent actions. He watches Gotti. He sees the charisma, the way Gotti enjoys the cameras, the way he thrives on being the dapper Don. But Sammy also sees the danger. The other families, the Genovese, the Lucchese, are quiet. And in this business, silence is the sound of a fuse burning. "The chin isn't happy, John," Sammy says softly, referring to Vincent Gigante, the boss of the Genovese family. "He thinks you're too loud. He thinks you're a lightning rod." Gotti leans forward, the light catching the gold ring on his pinky. Let him think. While he's wandering around Greenwich Village in a bathrobe pretending to be crazy, I'm making more money than this family has seen in 20 years. People love a winner, Sammy. And I'm the biggest winner in this city. Gotti's ego was becoming a skyscraper, but the foundation was already cracking. He was breaking the golden rule. Omerta is about silence, but John Gotti wanted to be a rock star. He was holding court, making himself visible, and inviting the devil to dinner. While Gotti was measuring his new crown, a hit team from the rival families was already checking into a hotel under false names, carrying bags that rattled with the weight of cold steel. January 14, 1986, 11:15 a.m. A luxury hotel lobby, Manhattan. The lobby is a cathedral of marble and gold leaf. The air is scented with expensive lilies and the faint citrusy perfume of wealthy travelers. John Gotti enters with 2 bodyguards. He moves with a rhythmic swagger, his silk tie perfectly knotted. He's here for a sit-down, a meeting to smooth over tensions with a construction union boss. But the atmosphere is wrong. The doorman avoids eye contact. A man in a grey suit is sitting in a wingback chair, reading a newspaper that hasn't been turned in 10 minutes. Gotti's survival instinct, honed in the gutters of East New York, begins to prickle at the back of his neck. "John," one of his guards whispers, his hand drifting toward his waistband. Suddenly, the man in the grey suit drops the paper. From underneath his coat, he pulls a suppressed pistol. It's a professional's weapon, quiet, efficient, deadly. At the same time, 2 more men emerge from the elevators. Thwip, thwip! The sound is like a suppressed sneeze. A vase of lilies behind Gotti shatters, spraying water and glass across his shoulder. Gotti doesn't freeze. He dives behind a heavy mahogany concierge desk, just as a second round chips the marble pillar where his head was a second ago. "The back exit! Now!" Gotti barks. He's trapped in a cage of gold. The assassins aren't street thugs. They move with military precision. They aren't looking to make a statement. They are looking to finish what the Castellano hit started. As Gotti scrambles through the kitchen, the smell of searing meat and industrial cleaner filling his lungs, he realizes this wasn't just a hit. It was a message from the commission. You are not the king yet. Gotti escapes through a service entrance, his suit ruined and his pride scorched. But as he reaches his car, he doesn't call for a retreat. He looks at Sammy the Bull and utters 5 words that will change the Mafia forever. January 14th, 1986, 8 p.m., the Ravenite Social Club. "They missed," Gotti says. He's changed into a fresh suit. His face is pale, but his eyes are burning with a terrifying manic energy. "They had me in a corner and they missed. That's a sign." "It's a sign that we need to go to ground, John," Sammy the Bull argues. "The Genovese, the Lucchese, they're all in on this. We're outnumbered." Gotti slams his hand on the table, the sound like a gunshot. "No, we don't hide. If you hide, you look like a victim. In this city, victims get buried. We hit back, not at the shooters, at the men who sent them. I want every captain from the other families to know that if I so much as sneeze, their houses get burned down with their families inside." This was the pivot point. The Mafia had always operated on business. You don't kill families. You don't target civilians. You keep it professional. Gotti was throwing the rule book into the furnace. He began a campaign of psychological and physical terror. Within 48 hours, 3 mid-level associates from the Lucchese family disappeared. Their cars were found in the Long Island Sound, but the men were never seen again. Gotti wasn't just defending himself, he was dismantling the bureaucracy of the mob. He was making it personal. He started showing up at the bars where the rival families drank. He would walk in, alone or with 1 man, buy a round of drinks and stare directly at the local capos. It was a bluff of legendary proportions. He was inviting them to try again, showing them he wasn't afraid of their shadows. The dapper Don was becoming the Teflon Don. But the FBI was watching this escalating war with a different kind of interest. They didn't want to stop the war, they wanted to let Gotti destroy the 5 families from the inside out. March 1986, Brooklyn, a back alley. The consequences of Gotti's defiance weren't just political, they were visceral. The city felt like a pressure cooker. Every time a car backfired, people dived for cover. The effetto lenda, the legend effect, was taking hold. People in the neighborhoods started talking about Gotti like he was a folk hero, the man who stood up to the old guard. But inside the Gambino family, the price of Gotti's ego was being paid in blood. Frank DeCicco, Gotti's loyal underboss and a key player in the Castellano hit, was getting into his car outside a social club in Brooklyn. Boom. A remote detonated bomb turned the Cadillac into a skeleton of flaming steel. DeCicco didn't survive. The blast was so powerful it shattered windows 2 blocks away. This was the commission's response to Gotti's bravado. They couldn't get Gotti, so they took his right arm. Gotti stood at the funeral, wearing dark glasses, his face a mask of stone. He didn't cry. He didn't offer a eulogy. He just stood there while the wind whipped the black flags of the funeral cars. "They want me to cry," Gotti whispered to Sammy the Bull as the casket was lowered. "They want me to sue for peace. Tell the boys to sharpen their knives. We aren't stopping until the 5 families are the one family." Gotti's decision was a pivot toward total war. He was willing to sacrifice his best friends to maintain his image. The theme of power was overshadowing the theme of loyalty. He was becoming a king of ashes. While Gotti planned his revenge for DeCicco, he didn't know that the real threat wasn't a bomb or a hitman. It was a tiny, high-tech microphone planted in the ceiling of an apartment above the Ravenite. June 1986, FBI surveillance van, 2 blocks from Mulberry St. Inside the van, it smells of cold coffee and ozone. Special Agent George Gabriel wears headphones, his eyes closed, focusing on the scratchy audio coming through the feed. For months, they've had nothing but static and Gotti playing loud Italian opera to drown out conversations. But Gotti has grown arrogant. He thinks he's smarter than the G-men. He started talking in the safe house apartment upstairs, thinking the walls are his friends. "I'm the boss," Gotti's voice comes through the wire, distorted but unmistakable. "I run the show. Sammy's a dog. He does what I tell him. He kills when I say kill. He's nothing without me." In the van, the agents exchange a look. They don't just have Gotti admitting to crimes. They have Gotti insulting the one man who keeps him alive, Sammy the Bull Gravano. The strategy of the FBI shifted. They didn't need to catch Gotti in a shootout. They needed to play on the one thing that destroys every criminal empire: vanity. Gotti's vanity was his greatest strength and his fatal flaw. He needed to be the smartest man in the room, which meant everyone else had to be a fool. The FBI began leaking information through street sources. They made sure word got back to Sammy that Gotti was blaming him for the DeCicco hit, that Gotti was planning to shelf him once the heat died down. The seeds of betrayal were being planted in the most fertile soil in New York. As the FBI listened, Gotti was planning his most audacious move yet: a public display of power that would either make him the king of New York or the most famous inmate in the federal system. 1987 to 1989, the federal courthouse. This is the era of the Teflon Don. Gotti is indicted on racketeering and murder charges. The media circus is unlike anything the city has ever seen. Every morning, Gotti steps out of a black Mercedes, adjusts his $5,000 suit, and waves to the crowd like a movie star. "How do you feel, John?" a reporter yells. "I feel great," Gotti quips, flashing a $1 million smile. "I feel like a winner." Inside the courtroom, the air is thick with the scent of old paper and tension. The prosecution presents evidence, tapes, and witnesses. But one by one, the witnesses lose their memory. They look at Gotti, sitting at the defense table with that icy, confident stare, and they forget everything they told the grand jury. One juror is bribed, another is intimidated. Gotti is playing a high-stakes game of chess with the American justice system, and he's winning. When the not guilty verdict is read, the streets of Little Italy erupt in fireworks. Gotti is no longer just a mobster. He is a legend. He beat the government. He beat the rival families. He is the untouchable king. But power is a drug, and Gotti was overdosing. He began to believe his own myth. He thought the Teflon would never wear off. He forgot that even the strongest armor has a seam. And that seam was Sammy the Bull, who was watching Gotti's fame with a growing sense of resentment. Sammy was the one doing the work. Gotti was the one taking the bows. At the height of his power, Gotti made a mistake that no boss should ever make. He stopped listening to the streets and started listening to the applause. December 11, 1990, the Ravenite Social Club. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with a knock on the door. The FBI finally moved in. Gotti, Sammy Gravano, and Frank Locascio were arrested in a coordinated strike. As they were being led away in handcuffs, Gotti was still playing the part. He winked at the cameras. He joked with the arresting agents. "What took you guys so long?" He laughed. But in the holding cell, the atmosphere changed. The walls were gray, the light was fluorescent and unforgiving. There was no opera music to hide their voices. There were no silk suits. Just 3 men in orange jumpsuits, facing the rest of their lives behind bars. The FBI played their ace. They sat Sammy the Bull down in an interrogation room and played the tapes from the apartment above the Ravenite. Sammy sat in silence as he heard Gotti's voice calling him a greedy dog, blaming him for murders Gotti had ordered, and belittling his loyalty. "You're a soldier, Sammy," the lead agent said, leaning in. "But your general is already selling you out to save his own skin." He's going to pin it all on you. Why be a martyr for a man who doesn't respect you? Sammy's jaw tightened. He looked at the tape recorder. In the world of the Mafia, there is no greater sin than being a rat. But there is also no greater fool than a man who dies for a traitor. The theme of loyalty was being weighed against the theme of survival. On a cold morning in November 1991, the legal world was rocked by an announcement that felt like an earthquake. Sammy the Bull Gravano, the man who knew where all the bodies were buried, had flipped. April 1992, the final trial. The courtroom is silent enough to hear a pin drop. John Gotti sits at the defense table, but the swagger is gone. His hair is still perfect, but his eyes are dark hollows of fury. He doesn't look at the gallery. He looks at the witness stand. Sammy the Bull walks in. He doesn't look like a mobster anymore. He looks like a man who has already accepted his fate. For days, Sammy recounts the inner workings of the Gambino family. He details the Castellano hit. He describes the hotel ambush. He explains how Gotti rose to power on a mountain of corpses. John Gotti was the boss, Sammy says, his voice flat and steady. Nothing happened without his word. No one died without his nod. Gotti's lawyers try to paint Sammy as a serial killer trying to save himself. And they aren't wrong. Sammy has admitted to 19 murders. But the jury doesn't care about Sammy's soul, they care about Gotti's crimes. The tapes provide the melody, and Sammy provides the lyrics. The Teflon finally stripped away. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. As the judge sentenced Gotti to life without the possibility of parole, Gotti remained defiant. He didn't flinch. He maintained the legend until the very end. But as he was led out of the courtroom, he saw the faces of the other family members in the back of the room. They weren't angry. They were relieved. Gotti's response, his loud, violent, ego-driven reign, had nearly destroyed the Mafia. By going away, he was finally doing the Commission a favor. John Gotti was sent to Marion Federal Penitentiary, a place designed to make men forget the sun. But even in a concrete box, the legend of the Dapper Don continued to haunt the streets of New York. June 10, 2002, United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners. John Gotti died not in a hail of bullets, but from cancer. He was 61 years old. His body was returned to New York, to the streets he once ruled with an iron fist and a silk smile. His funeral was a shadow of the mob's former glory. There were no politicians, no celebrities, just a long line of black limousines and the heavy presence of the FBI, still filming everyone who came to pay their respects. He was buried in a gold-plated casket, a final act of defiance and vanity. The Mafia changed after Gotti. They went back into the shadows. They learned that in the modern age, a boss who wants to be a star is a boss who wants to be a prisoner. Gotti's response to the hotel ambush, his decision to make the whole Mafia back off through fear, had worked in the short term. But in the end, the very fire he used to keep others away was the fire that consumed his empire. Today, tourists walk past the site of the Ravenite Social Club, now a high-end boutique. The smell of espresso and cigars is gone, replaced by expensive candles. But if you stand on the corner of 46th Street, when the winter mist rolls in, you can almost hear the echoes of the shots that killed Castellano and birthed a legend. Gotti became the most famous mobster in history, but he died a man without a country, betrayed by his closest friend, and forgotten by the family he tried to save. He won the battle of the image, but he lost the war of the streets. Conclusion: the story of John Gotti isn't just a story about crime, it's a story about the cost of the crown. It's about what happens when one man's ego becomes larger than the rules that kept him safe. Would you have stayed loyal to a man like Gotti, knowing he was talking behind your back? Or would you have become the bull to save your own life? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark history of the Gambino family, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more cinematic true crime documentaries. Leave a comment below. Was John Gotti the last true Don, or just a criminal who talked too much? See you in the next one.